Today's episode of Vice Versa, we're talking with a very special guest about chip shortages, battery investment, and the future of EV form factors. But as usual, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Ricky Roy. How you doing, Ricky?
Doing awesome, Matt. And by the way, welcome back. We did a show last week. I think we scraped by, but we are very, very happy to have you back.
I'm glad to be back. I did watch it. I thought it was a great episode. And I want to thank Ben Sullins for filling in. He did a great job.
Absolutely. And speaking of special guests, we have one this week. Hopefully, probably the reason why you guys are all here. But we have a very special guest and friend, Mark Frohnmayer, the CEO of Archimoto, with us today. And we're going to talk about kind of the future of EVs and Archimoto's place in that world. How's it going, Mark?
Well, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me on the program.
It's great having you here. We're really excited to talk to you. Archimoto has been a company I've been really interested in for ever since you guys came out. I just love what you guys are doing. So you're going to
right sizing daily mobility is no mean feat.
Yep. So how about we kind of kickstart some of the conversation with one of these news stories that we were talking about at the beginning. So to kick things off, this past week, the chip shortage and parts supply shortage has been rearing its ugly head again. And a lot of companies have been coming out over the past few weeks and months, having to curtail production. They've been shutting down production in their factories. Things like Ford and GM announced 1 to 2 week closures at multiple factories. Nissan is closing its Tennessee factory until September 13th. Toyota announced a 40% cut in production in Japan and North America for 2 months, which means 360,000 vehicles are being cut from production. And the average prices of cars are going up because of this shortage. The average price in the US right now has hit $41,000, which is over $8,000 higher than just 2 years ago, which is just insane. So I'm just curious, what's your take on this, Mark? What's your is it hitting Archimoto? What's your impression of being in the industry of this chip shortage?
Yeah, well, I would say that the events of the pandemic and not just the pandemic, there've been a number of different events between the crazy freezing temperatures in Texas to flooding and the blockage of the big canal, and that in combination with all of the knock-on effects of COVID have really, I think, laid bare the fragility of the global supply chain, and that dealing with that is going to be a multi-year effort, obviously. And you see that with, efforts to onshore microchip production, onshore battery production. But I think that's going to ultimately lead us to a much more resilient supply chain focused around the electric vehicle world. But there will be choppy seas between now and then, and we are not immune. If you guys were on our last stakeholder webinar, we cut our vehicle production target for the year to 425 vehicles, and we were planning on delivering 500 plus. I would say, and that is, it's not just microchips. It's the Texas issues with there was a refinery complex that made as an output of that the seals on our gearboxes, and that was one of the things that we had to scramble and deal with amongst many, just as one example. I think for what it means for Archimoto in particular, though, is that we're sort of in a gap between the launch of low volume production and then our planned entry into the beginning of the ramp to much higher volume production starting late next year. And that gives us, because we are able to put vehicles on the road as a new entrant still today, and it gives us a larger time window to help adapt to the need for parts in much higher volume. What it is forcing us to do, though, is to be very judicious about where each of our production units goes. And so where we had previously planned for the bulk of this year's production to go to individual purchasers, now we're really shifting the focus to rentals and rideshare and various fleet opportunities. while still making sure that we're getting key early adopters vehicles that they've been waiting for a long time. But yeah, we're not immune, but I think when I look out at the landscape, it makes me glad that we're not in very high volume production right now and having to deal with that type of a scramble. It just means for us sort of tighter, more careful resource allocation of what we can build.
Right. Ricky, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was reading that some companies, what they're doing is they're actually just manufacturing the vehicles and storing them. And the idea is as soon as the chips arrive, we'll stick them in there and we'll sell them. That way we can continue the manufacture of it. But that's a whole other kind of potentially, am I freezing up a little?
A little bit.
You might be potentially, okay.
Yeah.
You might be potentially building cars that are going to age out, or, I mean, what if the chip shortage is so drastic that the chips never come, and now you've got a bunch of metal that is like a model year 2021 and no one wants to buy it next year or something. So it's a tough spot for everybody, and I don't know if there is a easy or an obvious answer here, but somebody in the comments mentioned it's kind of a rough time right now, and I agree. There's really not an easy answer. I think people are probably kind of tempted with the inflated prices of used cars to think about maybe selling their car because their cars are worth more than ever before, but you got to remember you got to turn around and buy a car too. So, it's a tough spot. What do you think, Matt?
Well, I was going to say, I think, Mark, you raised a really good point. It's not just the chip shortage. It's like in the article, they were talking about how it's also like wiring harnesses, plastics and glass. There's shortages across everything, which is just having a ripple effect. And from my understanding of the supply chain, it's like when you have a downturn at the manufacturing level, that's like a ripple effect of 6 months before you can it's not like you can turn it on a dime and have everything back to normal. So it's like we're looking at late 2022, maybe 2023 before things start to get back to normal as far as the supply chain is concerned.
And you have issues where these events are not all hitting simultaneously. You could have a COVID outbreak that stops a plastics plant from producing your body panels 1 week, and then you could have a port outbreak that stops containers going out for 8 weeks, and then you could and each of those has huge downstream ripple effects. So that's why we're anticipating choppy seas for the next 18 months.
Right.
But that it just means on the business level, it means we've got to adapt, and we've got to make sure that we are building out the business in the smartest way that we can. I think that is I think we are doing our best to make the best of it. I think that we're relatively speaking in a good position because of that. And I would say that particularly as we're in the mode of the sort of really the transition to electric vehicles, that it'll be interesting to see how the major players react in terms of their product roadmaps. Because for us, the bulk of our work today is designing replicable mass production, and that's we are aiming to basically get the factory in a box that we can spin up not just one scale production facility, but ultimately many production facilities, and that this time of work from home, collaborate effectively with lots of remote teams. That's actually let that process go faster. But it really depends, depending on what stage a particular business is in, whether the impact is going to be either entirely negative or have some silver linings.
Right. So we want to jump to the next story, or do you have anything additional you want to say on this, Ricky?
No, I was just going to say, Mark, I think what we don't think about often is supply chains, raw materials, mining. I met with a company from Canada who's going to be starting a graphite mine in North America, and they were talking about how pretty much all of our graphite comes from China, and either geopolitical reasons or maybe shutdowns or whatever the case might be, we could very quickly and we could fall into a situation where there's no graphite. Without graphite, we don't have anode for batteries, and we'd kind of be shutting down all of the gigafactories and everything else. A lot of people don't realize just how fragile some of these supply chains are, and I think really the future really ought to onshore. You mentioned onshoring more capabilities and stuff, but we should reimagine business a little bit. I think the pandemic has taught us that we can't just rely on everything working smoothly, because it has for a long time. And when things go well, they go well. But we need to start thinking about robustness and just how predictable and reliable some of these supply chains are, and resilient. Hopefully, that's something that gets more attention in the future, because it doesn't get talked about enough.
We spent the last decades as a country here offshoring all of our, as much of our manufacturing as we can, in kind of this race to the bottom, and that's clearly showing itself now to be long term a real bad move. And when you think about the pandemic is one thing, but climate disruption, that's happening more and more and more frequently. And so we want to be in a position where we have localized production of the things that we need, so that the places that aren't presently in a horribly disrupted state can get so the cavalry can come in. But if everything we build is dependent on some piece that comes from everywhere in the world, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, we need a more resilient and diverse supply chain to be able to get through all things like this.
And just recognizing that we are capable humans, and we can build the things that we need in our own backyard.
Yes.
versus assuming that the sort of the term low cost country, it's just that one is, I've always found particularly repugnant, because it just means you're just going, it's this sort of push to move from place to place to place purely based on the cost of labor, and not thinking about the long-term implications of what that really says.
One of the things that Matt always talks about is how there's a whole new slew of products and form factors that electrification enables. I mean, could you imagine if someone told you 20 years ago that Eugene, Oregon and Fremont, California would be manufacturing centers for vehicles? I mean, that's absurd and crazy, right? It's a notion that I wouldn't even believe myself, but here we are, because that's kind of the cool direction that we're headed in. So I do think there's hope for this as new startups emerge, but yeah, it's a shift in thinking for sure.
Yeah, that kind of actually ties in. That kind of ties into the next story I kind of wanted to bring up, which is going into that self-reliance a little bit, which is about Toyota announcing they're spending $13.5 billion by 2030 on battery production, which to me I thought was interesting, considering when you compare it to things like what Ford and GM and VW are doing. VW is spending $178 billion for electrification. GM is planning to spend $8 billion on 2 battery plants here in the US. You've got Ford, who has a joint venture with SK Innovation, and they're spending about $30 billion by 2025, which is even way more than Toyota's planning on spending. And Toyota's focusing on solid-state batteries for the future of their cars, but they're still pushing heavily on the hybrid model of battery electric cars. And by 2035, they're only expecting 2 million dedicated EVs, where there's going to be 6 million battery electric hybrids that they're still planning on selling. So it's a completely different approach, but it kind of ties back to the bigger theme, which is batteries seem to be that kind of linchpin for all of this. So it doesn't matter what your intentions are. If you don't have a good supply chain, good battery suppliers, whether you're controlling it yourself, like GM's building their own plants, Tesla, of course, has their own plants, VW is building their own plants. I was just curious for you. I mean, you can definitely talk about this, because it's like you're an EV company, so you clearly have a relationship for a battery supplier. What's your take on the industry at large for, can we make enough batteries for what we need to do? And are these companies making the right moves?
Well, so from Archimoto's seat, right? Yeah. Like our goal, we are today essentially battery agnostic, right? The goal, the big picture goal of Archimoto is to just use a lot less battery for going to get a bag of groceries or a cup of coffee. Our first platform is uses about a quarter of the battery of a full-size car, and our second platform is going to use about less than a quarter of that. And so over the long haul, as we get to the point where we have multiple mass production facilities cranking out Archimotos, it may make sense to invest in our own battery production facilities. But we just want to do a lot better with the batteries that we have. In terms of the what I'm seeing out there, and this, I really look at, I think what Tesla unveiled on Battery Day about a year ago, with how they are planning on really ramping up mass production of battery cells. Ultimately, I think that's going to have a ripple effect throughout the entire industry. But I would say any company that today is still making a pretty lighthearted push towards vehicle electrification, I'd be concerned that they're going to miss the boat.
Yeah. Ricky, what do you think?
Yeah, I think of the new companies that are pure electric. For them, this is absolutely critical and core. If you don't have batteries, you can't make Archimotos, you can't make Teslas, as you mentioned. So I think there's a focus and a clear path forward there. But for the legacy automakers, it seems a little more nebulous potentially. Like if you're Toyota, and by the way, the part of the story that bugs me with Toyota is they're also like actively lobbying Congress to like lower some of these emission standards and stuff, and like loosen restrictions, and so it's like they can't make up their mind. I do think they're dragging their feet quite a bit. I think, as you mentioned, the targets are way too small, way too late. But for them, if they don't have battery supply, like for example, the Ford F-150 pickup truck is a good example. They're planning a very small scale, like 50,000 units, I think, in a couple of years. I think even 35,000 next year. So for them, if there's a big battery storage shortage, they just turn around and sell their gas cars, right? So there's less motivation or incentive for them to really take this seriously. I think VW is taking it seriously. I think General Motors is as well. The pouch versus cylindrical debate, that's another interesting topic maybe we can get into as far as the path they're going down. But yeah, it does feel like they're now kind of de-incentivized in two ways. They have a gasoline car model business, and if they feel a constriction in supply chain for batteries, they can just say, look, we'd love to make EVs, but we just can't. So we're going to keep making gas cars. So yeah, I think, Mark, you're right. It seemingly feels like they could easily miss the boat on this, but yeah, there is some good progress.
And you can, there's certainly that we can just, keep making gas cars, but I think that's going to run into a major public policy obstacle in the coming years. As the effects of climate change are becoming more and more and more obvious, there's a huge pressure on the public side to push for cleaner solutions. You saw, I think New York just announced that they won't be allowing sale of gas-powered vehicles in 2035, if I recall correctly. And that's mirrored in many other jurisdictions, and I expect the pace of that will continue to accelerate.
Yeah, that's actually the biggest surprise for me for what Toyota announced. It's like Europe is going electric. They're requiring it by law. China's doing something very similar. That domino is starting to fall here in the United States. I don't understand how Toyota's looking and reading the tea leaves and deciding what they're doing, because the future of gasoline cars is going away very quickly. So I'm worried for Toyota, who's such a massive company today, that they're gonna just let this ship sail and they're gonna get left behind.
Well, that's the issue. When you think of a massive company, I mean, that's a big ship. It's a difficult ship to turn, and the majors in this space have really, I'd say they've been asleep at the wheel as far as the push to electrification, and are having to play major catch up. And to be doing that in the middle of pandemic and climate disruptions is a trick.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the whole battery thing is, to me, kind of the litmus test of which companies are taking this seriously and which ones aren't. And so, like, you look at VW, they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars transitioning to electric. That to me says they're serious about this. And then you look at companies like Ford, which are kind of in that middle ground, and then Toyota, which are just like letting the ship go away, and they're betting on hydrogen and other technologies that they're hoping will catch on at some point. Any closing thoughts on that, Ricky?
No, I think you hit on the head. A litmus test is exactly what the battery story really is at this point. And these trends, it's going to be too late too quickly. If people are like, oh, well, okay, we can make electric cars now, but there's no supply, they'll quickly run into problems, and other people have better mastery. Yeah, it's one of those things you can't see coming quickly enough, and you can't shift quickly enough. And Mark alluded to that. These are big ships. They're not easy to turn. But we hope everybody gets the message and makes the transition, right?
Yeah, and this actually brings up, we can transition to the last part I want to kind of talk about with you, Mark, which is obviously all about you and Archimoto. But one of the things I've been so excited about EVs is it seems to be unlocking and opening a brand new door to new EV form factors that we typically haven't seen on the mass market. And it's like everything from one wheels to electric unicycles. I worked with a computer engineer at my last job who rode a one-wheel unicycle to work, this little one-wheel unicycle. It doesn't have to be these massive SUVs. It's like these little personal mobility devices. It's just opening up new possibilities, especially since they don't have a tailpipe. They can also be used in areas where you can't use a gasoline car. Even though you could make a small engine that works on a small, like, little moped, you can't use it everywhere. So it's like things like the Archimoto, the FUV, the guys that you've designed are, to me, the kind of the beginning of the possibility. And I'm curious how you landed on that design and why you went down that path.
Yeah, great lead in. A friend of mine calls it the Cambrian explosion of electric vehicles, where you just we're seeing a lot of amazing, really rethinking of the form factor, and it comes down to a number of different things that allow that. It's a lot easier to package a battery and electric motors than it is to package an internal combustion engine. And of course, if you've got an internal combustion engine, you've got major regulatory challenges in terms of actually putting them on the road as far as emissions go. And a lot of that gets sidestepped with the move to EV. So I think you have devices that are certainly easier to prototype and concept than gas vehicles, and then you've just got a lot more freedom within the form to try out different ideas. As far as how we got to where we are now with the fun utility vehicle, we really spent the first about 8 years of Archimoto's development iterating over 8 different full vehicle concepts in the three-wheel vehicle space before landing on what we thought was going to be the real sweet spot for daily mobility. And I think what I would say there too is that a lot of technology products that are driven by technology can sometimes end up being solutions in search of a problem. And I would say probably something like the Segway was this, where you had a really cool tech, but then ultimately the problem that it solves is walking a bit faster. Whereas where Archimoto started was really looking at the problem of daily transportation. How do people solve daily transportation today? And what are the sort of the parameters of the vast majority of those trips? And then how can we solve that in a much more efficient way? And that's where you say, okay, well, people are driving on average about 30 miles a day. They're almost always driving alone or with just one other person and a relatively small amount of stuff. How can we solve that daily driving problem? And that spans individual consumers. It's fleets, delivery of last mile goods, city inspectors going out to look at buildings, people doing maintenance on corporate campuses. And so that was having that be our guidepost, I think really helped us hone in on a really sweet new vehicle platform.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to bring up was, like, right now you're only available in basically the West Coast and Florida. And I'm in the Boston area, so New England, and it's like, when are you going to make a cold climate version of friendly Archimoto?
Yeah, so that's absolutely in the plans.
Okay.
And that is the reason for going with the more minimalist approach, particularly as in terms of just kicking off initial production, is that it just has to do with capital efficiency. There is a giant market in temperate, nice climates for which our present product family is entirely suitable. But as you get into much colder climates, the Northeast in the winter, the Midwest, then you need to a larger portion of the market is going to want more climate comfort features. I mean, there's still a ton of people who ride motorcycles who live in the Midwest and who live in the Northeast. So there is definitely a market there. But as we look to, true mass production, very high volume delivery, then we're going to want to have an option for people who want full climate enclosure and HVAC and all the rest.
All right. You're muted, Matt.
Whoops. I was muted. I was just to say, I asked that obviously because I was very interested in myself, but there were also people in the comments that have been asking that too. It's like, because I would love to have one of these in Massachusetts, but obviously the current state of it wouldn't work here in the middle of winter.
Rocky R says, Mark, I'm going to sell my gasoline car for an Archimoto FUV. So, that sounds good to me.
Awesome. Yes. Sounds good, Rocky.
Glenn Cook says, my Archimoto has heated seats and heated grips. So there's clearly there's some weatherization there, but yeah, there's going to be a better fully enclosed variant in the future. So to your point, Mark.
And by the way, we developed these in Eugene, Oregon, where it rains. Hopefully, it will start raining again very soon. But the overhead fairing does a very good job of keeping the water off. To Glenn's point, it's got heated grips, heated seats, and then we've got accessories. Even the accessory that's coming online here very soon that is just, so you can think of it sort of like a kayak skirt, but it's a splash guard for both passengers. So your legs stay dry, you've got heated seats, heated hands, and then you put on a jacket. And it's actually really cool to be in the middle of a rainstorm and you're toasty and dry, and yet you get to be in the world. And I think that's one of the things I love about the Archimoto driving experience is that you're not in a separated bubble. You're actually part of the world around you. You can interact with people that are around you, and you actually get to experience life versus being. And I think that's kind of it's very different than, hey, I want to be in a totally plushed out robo-taxi so that I can spend all of my time tweeting while I'm getting from A to B. A lot of the joy of the Archimoto is just actually the experience of the ride and the experience of the world.
Matt, have you driven one yet?
Not yet. I really, really want to try one. They look like a blast to ride.
Yeah, I've driven on the Roadster and the FUV. It, like Mark said, it really is an experience. It's fun. You get the hang of it pretty quickly. I don't know if you rode motorcycles in the past, but it is an experience. It really is. It's fun. It's a different take, and that's kind of why I've always liked this company. So here's the next question I've kind of seen in the comments and also in my video, Mark. How does Archimoto compare to like a gasoline equivalent, like a Polaris Slingshot comes to mind? And there was a question about Aptera. So what do you think about as far as like similarities or differences between the FUV and what Aptera is building?
I love Aptera. I think that their whole vision of just the absolute utmost in terms of efficiency. They've created a beautiful industrial design, and I'm rooting for them to get that into production. And those guys are obviously not quitters. I mean, they went through the ringer once before. They got the IP back, and they're doing it again. And so I think I'm definitely a big fan. They are aiming for a full-size car type thing that goes a very long way. We are aiming for something that is very small footprint and great for urban driving. I don't see a lot of crossover in terms of competitive overlap, but certainly tons of mission overlap. Versus other three-wheelers like the Can-Am and the Polaris, I would say a few differentiators there. Our Roadster is probably the closest product in our family to what they're offering. Those are that's the fun machine category. It's the weekend warrior toy, and there's a great market for it. From a design standpoint, from a vehicle architecture standpoint, obviously Archimotos are electric. Those are both gas-powered machines. But Archimotos are also dual motor front-wheel drive, where those are rear-wheel drive gas engines. And so when you have a rear-wheel drive reverse trike, there are some disadvantages that come into play. One is that the design sort of fights itself, because you want to weight the rear wheel for traction, and yet you want to push the weight forward for better stability between the two wheels. And so the first 3 prototypes that we built at Arcimoto were all rear-wheel drive, single-wheel drive. And it was in switching, when we switched on Gen 4 to front-wheel drive, it made a huge difference in terms of just the feel of the ride. And I would say, if you take a ride on a Arcimoto Roadster and a ride on a Can-Am Spyder, I just let me know how it goes.
I might try that. I'm curious because I haven't driven on the other gas versions at all. Another question I don't think I've asked you before, but there's a great question from Karamo. He says, I wonder if the FUV will qualify for the EV tax credit. Have we talked about that before?
So there are tax credits. In Oregon, I think now you can get up to $5,000 back for an Arcimoto purchase. In California, it's like $2,250. And our understanding is that that Congress is now deliberating on a whole suite of changes to the tax crediting system for electric vehicles. Obviously, what we hope for is for a level playing field for consumers, so that you are not penalized as a consumer for making the most efficient choice. Right now there is a federal credit for 2-wheelers and a federal credit for 4-wheelers, and there's a gap in there that we think needs to be filled.
Yes, I would agree with that. Just before I ask my question that's related to that, just want to give a big shout out to Robert Klocko, who just gave a super chat, said, great to see you both and with an interesting guest. So thank you very much, Robert. That kind of leads to one of my questions when you're talking about costs and incentives. One of your missions is to make smarter, smaller, more affordable transport. But right now the FUVs cost over $20,000. I'm curious what your plan is like to try to get that price lower without incentives.
Well, and ultimately, the long-term mission for the company is to deliver a truly affordable product that doesn't require any incentives, which is why the number one goal for the company right now is to design replicable mass production. Those are the long-term price target of getting a vehicle somewhere in the 10K range is not achievable if we're building 400 vehicles a year, so that's why getting to mass production is our overarching number one big goal, bar none. And that is so there are major benefits in terms of economies of scale. When you buy things in higher volume, when you buy parts in higher volume, they come in at a much lower price. Part of it has to do with designing for high volume production. So where the way that we build now, we have a vertically integrated semi-automated factory for low volume production, where we build, and Ricky, you've got a video of your tour of that facility where we basically go from sheet metal and tube through part forming, robotic welding, and then machining to put final parts on the assembly line. When we're building it at 50,000 units a year, it doesn't make sense to build a lot of those parts that way. You want to just take that weldment and turn it into a single casting or a stamping or an injection molded plastic part. And that just has to do with the balance of production volume output and then cost of tooling up front. And that's one of the big steps that we're taking over the course of the next 2 years.
That kind of ties into one of the questions that we have from Beach Crow. He says, will the future Archimotos have a cast framing instead of the welded tubing?
We are moving to for the volume production version. We're going to be moving to a different way of doing the frame. We haven't really talked about that yet, so we're gonna save that for a future unveil. But it's the goal is to be lighter, lower cost, look cool, and still provide the same level of occupant protection.
There is something that, like, when I look at the FUV, it does not look like this, but it evokes the type of vehicle that you see typically in, like, over in Asia. Like, you see it a lot in India and parts of Africa, like South Africa, like tuk-tuks and like rickshaws. It seems other areas of the world are very attuned to using vehicles that are appropriately sized for whatever the task is you're trying to do. Where here in the United States, it's bigger, fatter, better, and we tend to not do that approach. Are you, in the long term, looking internationally, or is that just so far off for right now you're not even focused on it?
Absolutely. No, international. We've always thought of the Archimoto as being an opportunity the world over, particularly in areas that have, tighter streets, more dense cities, and that are, predominantly focused on much lighter weight forms of transportation. We think that the Archimoto platform provides a much better on-ramp for the future than the move to the full-size car. We have, the disadvantage in the U.S. is just that we've had that 100-year legacy of automotive supersizing that's happened, particularly as a result of, super cheap oil and the build out of the interstate freeway system, but as the externalities become very clear on that front, we think it makes a lot of sense to downsize the footprint here as well. And then we've got another platform in development that came out of the acquisition of Tilting Motor Works at the beginning of this year that's really squarely focused on micromobility. More of the e-bike, e-scooter class of product that we think we're going to be able to bring some new real twist to.
Yeah, there's a lot of cities over in Europe that are very bike centric. So the FUV and smaller seems like a no-brainer for you guys in the future. And it's great to hear that you are kind of looking more broadly than just the US, even though you guys are just starting right now. Yeah.
We're looking forward to the day when the FUV is the big hulking vehicle on the road. That's part of the plan.
So can we talk a little about specs, Mark? You want to lay out like how much range you get, the battery size, like how long it takes to charge? Because I think there's
Sure.
people who maybe are interested in the Archimoto, and there's probably a couple of questions that are going to be common that they're going to have.
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember is that the idea of the electric car is we've got to make something that can do everything that a car can do, which is go hundreds of miles on a tank, carry 5 to 7 people, and charge in a few minutes from a gas pump. Archimoto has a very different focus, which is we want to do the things that people do on a daily basis much more efficiently. And so the average American is driving about 30 miles a day, median trip something like 5 miles. And so the design of the Archimoto was to say, how can we solve those trips really well? It's got a 19.2 kilowatt hour battery, about 100 miles of range for daily, for city driving, and then that falls off pretty quickly as you start to go high speed. So if you're going 55 miles an hour, you get about 60 miles of range, and then that drops off considerably if you really are going full throttle the whole way. And then when you charge, I mean, the default charging is you plug it into your household outlet when you get home, and every morning you've got a full tank. We also support level 2 charging. So you from a level 2 charger, it'll charge up in about 4.5 hours, something like that. As we look forward, all of those things will, of course, continue to improve. So we're going to see incremental improvements in energy density in the battery. We're going to see continued improvements in drivetrain efficiency as we continue to lightweight and continue to lightweight the vehicle, which will provide more range. And then we're looking at various different ways of adding higher capacity charging, particularly for fleets that have delivery vehicles that want to be doing a couple hundred miles a day. There needs to be a way to get those vehicles charged up faster than 4.5 hours.
Actually raises a question for me. It's like usually there's like, for those of us that are not in the industry and we're talking about EVs, there's a whole thing of, oh, this new battery is going to come out. It's going to make range of cars 500 miles. It's like, well, do you need a 500-mile car? Or is it better for that company to actually scale back how much batteries they're using in that car to produce more cars that are 300 miles instead of the 500 miles? As that happens for Archimoto, I'm curious, like, is your design principle based on the user experience, which I'm guessing it probably is, like you're targeting X number of miles. So if a battery technology and all those efficiencies get better, it doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily have an Archimoto FUV that can go 300 miles. You'd opt to make smaller, more efficient batteries because it's going to make the vehicle cheaper. I'm assuming the answer to that would be yes.
Well, and a lot of it comes down. I mean, part of this is from the discussion at the beginning of the talk about batteries and the constraint of batteries. It's if you've got you can put if you've got 100 kilowatt hours of battery, you can build 100 kilowatt hour battery car, or you can build 5 Arcimoto FUVs. Right. So you can serve 5 trips at the same time for the one trip that you were doing in a full-size car, and that really comes down to the question of utilization, which is that we want to maximize energy efficiency, and we also want to maximize utilization of the vehicles, so that it's not about having the car is something that we leave parked 95% of its life. It's this rapidly depreciating asset that we don't actually use. That's incredibly expensive. And so a big piece of our story as we look forward is how do we not just continue to drive down the sort of the environmental footprint of each thing that we build, but then how do we really drive up its utility in the marketplace? And that ultimately comes to vehicle sharing, which is that there's a Theodore Levitt quote, which is people don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. You want a problem. You're looking for the problem to be solved, not necessarily you don't necessarily want to own the tool that does it. And so for us it's we're looking forward to the day when you can hit a button on your phone, vehicle pulls up, you jump into the driver's seat, you take it where you want to go, you get out, and it goes on to the next person who needs a ride. And that's a little twist on the sort of the robo-taxi concept, which is that it's actually a much lower barrier to have something that is that is only driving itself or being remotely operated when there's no human inside, and where it can be constrained to certain paths or lower speed roads or whatever. But that's utilization is a big piece of the puzzle, and then just continually hammering down on the environmental footprint of everything that we build.
So is that your autonomy plan, essentially? Like you could call an Archimoto, like an FUV, to show up at your house, then I get in and I can enjoy driving it around myself. And then when I'm done, it drives itself back to wherever it needs to go, to some depot somewhere.
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
That's cool. Okay, I can get behind that.
Yeah, there's 2 things at play there. One is downsizing the car. The less metal material there is, emissions to produce it, the less raw goods you need, and then battery supply. You can build 5, right, 3 or 4 for the price, if you will, of one bigger car. And then on top of all that, you hire the utilization. And Mark has talked about he has rental fleets. So anybody who wants to check one out and mess with one, check out their website for their locations. But there's one in Florida, there's one in San Diego and Eugene. Rent it for the day. But that's another cool business model is if you don't want to even own it, you could just use it for when you need it and hire the utilization. And you combine that with the smaller, right sizing, if you will. That's a huge reduction in cost and pollution and materials needed, and it all goes to the mission. We talk about electric cars as a great alternative to gasoline, but we're still building cars the same big size. And if you look on the freeway, take a look around you, odds are there's a bunch of people driving by themselves. There was a joke earlier that if I could fit my 2 kids in their car seats in Archimoto, I would consider it. And somebody else joked that, well, depending on how big your kids are, they might be able to fit in the back of a deliberator. But there are some use cases where this might not work.
Recommended. Not recommended.
That's from the CEO, straight from the CEO's mouth. Don't do that. But for a lot of people, for a lot of the time, this works. This would do the trick. That's kind of, as a motorcycle rider, I think I've always had that feeling.
Yeah, you can. If you think about every time you've been on the freeway, where there's an empty carpool lane and gridlock in all the rest of the lanes. Right. What does that say? That says that everyone in those gridlocked vehicles is driving alone, which is nuts.
Yeah. Well,
and the bigger the truck sometimes too. Like I've seen some of these big F-250s, 350s. Usually, person by themselves, no cargo, just alone. Well, it's a cultural thing too. There's some factors at play, but.
There was a survey of truck owners that something like 30% of pickup truck owners 37% use the bed of the pickup 1 or fewer times per year. So again, it's not that pickup trucks are bad. Pickup trucks are incredibly useful tools for certain jobs. And I think a lot of that utilization question is, how do we move to a system where we are using the right tool for the job? And we think that the Archimoto platform offers a lot of right tools for a wide range of everyday transport jobs.
We should probably kind of quickly talk about what I always found fascinating, Mark, and Mark is a software person as well. I always talk about architecture when I talk about software. It's the key. If you build it well, it's extensible. You can do a lot of different things with it. It doesn't require a lot of work to add features and stuff. Your platform has been pretty awesome because it supports a whole host of products. You've mentioned the product family, but so there's a Deliverator. If for people who believe the future of food and food delivery, or just delivery of everything under the sun is going to increase all the way down to Amazon deliveries, well, a product like this really makes sense, especially in urban centers where finding parking spots even for a couple of minutes to drop off packages is tough. This kind of makes sense. So there's a Deliverator. Then there's like the first responder built for emergency response vehicles with with the lighting and all of that. My favorite is that SherpTech collab where you've got it's like a flatbed truck with like fold out walls. I have a link in the description to a video that I have that you can go check out our video. We kind of dig into it a little bit, but it is really, really capable. It holds shockingly a large amount of stuff.
It sure packs a lot. That's for sure.
Is that the tagline?
It's a new code name. We're still working on the final product name.
Got it. Yeah, it's
Sir Mix-a-Lot one.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's cool how much you can do with this one platform, which is a super cool part about it. And the Roadster probably gives you get rid of the roll bar and you get the rigidity reduced, and it has a motorcycle feel, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So all that comes from one platform. So this, maybe the coolest part about this company is you guys might not even really understand what will be the most popular product, but you've got all these lines, and let's say in 2 years delivery becomes the big thing. Everyone's getting everything delivered, and the Deliverator sales go through the roof. Like, you guys are ready to kind of be at the front of all these different kinds of trends that I see, like kind of micro trends in mobility and lifestyle culture, partly due to what's happened in the past year and a half, electrification and other things. I feel like you guys are kind of at the center of some of that, which is cool.
The FUV is the ultimate social distancing machine. That's for sure. But one of the things that we've been doing, and one of the reasons why we are, well, really the primary reason why we're spending some of our bandwidth over the course of this year really mapping out a lot of different ways that you can use the platform and different variants that you can do, is that all feeds back into the development of the mass production version to just make it so that it is a truly very, very extensible platform. I was talking with a guy earlier today. He said, well, this thing, you need a beach version that's got, where you can have a cooler on the back with taps and a pop-up umbrella. And I was like, yeah, you're talking about the thirst responder. It's on the list.
That's awesome.
You've thought about this, clearly. Matt, I don't know if you had a chance to... I don't know if Matt, if you've had a chance to watch my video, but one of the really cool takeaways from the event, the summer showcase, was this cool tech they're working on. Currently, the FUV has power steering, but I mean, at a dead stop, when you're trying to back into a spot or reverse out, it's a bit tough to move the wheels. It's a problem with most things. But Mark has been working with a company that is providing this kind of torque steering system. You want to talk about that a little bit, Mark, and how it works?
Yeah, and the challenge is you've got a weighted front end and then handlebars, which only go, it's about 40 degrees on 80 degrees total lock to lock. That's a lot less steering leverage than if you had a steering wheel that's like 3 spins from edge to edge. And so with just the power steering unit doing the work, it's pretty taxed, particularly at dry steering. And we had this, we've had this on the plans for a while, and we finally got into it with a company called Stoffel Systems down in the Bay Area to implement torque vectoring, which is where really fine control of the 2 motors in the front to help out with traction and basically do things like regenerative anti-lock braking and improve stability and so on. But one of the really neat outcomes of that is that for low speed steering, They were able to get it to the point where you can steer the vehicle with a little controller without touching the handlebars at all. You can dry steer it just using the motors in the front. So one wheel basically pulls back a little bit, the other wheel moves forward, and that just naturally creates the steering action. And so that's we're also in that phase where we're just taking in a ton of customer feedback on the user experience, and then doing everything that we can to continue to refine that experience in advance of going into much larger scale production. I think that's, again, it's sort of one of the advantages that we have being in production now at low volume, getting lots and lots of butts in seats and getting feedback to make the ultimate scale production version much better.
Yeah, I think we've taken up a lot of your time today, but I was thinking we could read the last super chat that we got from Eric Kessler as a kind of a way to go out on this. I can't wait to learn more about what Sandy Monroe said, maybe some rapid producibility improvements. I really wish you the very best because I want one for the beach. Just like that.
Awesome.
Yes, Eric.
Well, and Sandy did I think, Ricky, did you interview him at PIR?
I chatted with him a little bit, but I didn't really interview him, no.
Yeah, there were a couple of videos that popped out about where he went into some depth on what their team has been doing with us, and I'm actually in about 5 minutes going to jump on a call with that team. So
that's awesome.
Was it Transport Evolved? I think they have a video.
Yeah, I think Transport Evolved did.
So anybody who wants to hear about what Sandy was talking about with Archimoto and their kind of collaboration, check out Transport Evolved, and maybe I can put a link to it in the pinned comments later.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today. It's been awesome being able to talk to you, to get to know you a little bit. It's been fantastic.
Well, it's been fun getting stuck in the middle with you guys. So thanks for having me on the program, and we'll see you soon.
All right.
Thanks so much, Mark. We appreciate your time.
Bye, Mark.
See you.
Cheers. And if you guys are wondering if Mark is always that much fun, I can tell you right now he is. It's such a cool, fun company culture they have. The people that work there and the team, it just feels like a ton of fun. And he's one of those super cool CEOs. On the Archimoto YouTube channel, he has this Kenny Rogers kind of remake song. I'll just say that much about his adoration for Sandy Monroe. Definitely go check it out. It's really good.
That's awesome.
By the way, I think our audience could double, part-time at least on kind of coming up with product names. We got the Parkimoto. We got
the Thirst.
This is good.
Was it the Thirsterator?
The Thirst Responder. That was Mark.
The Thirst Responder.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That'd be popular here in San Diego for sure. But yeah, hopefully you guys had fun. We're gonna try to get industry experts and CEOs and really cool people that we can get in touch with to bring to the show. So if you guys have other CEOs or cool people you'd want us to chat with, we can always reach out. We can't guarantee anything, but we'll do our part. And you guys hit that like button enough and subscribe enough, and we grow enough, and our access will just reach that much further.
Exactly. And don't forget that we're live every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can always listen to the podcast version of the show at viceversa.show. As always, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.